Hello friends, and welcome to another video lesson from DBOS Talks. If you haven't subscribed yet, please click subscribe and click the bell so that you can be notified of new uploads. In this video, we'll be learning how to create a drop-down list in Excel. But first, we must know when we must be using one. When do we need one? So there could be a number of reasons that made us think of using a drop-down list in Excel, but I'm just listing down the top two. One is we wanted to validate the value being entered in Excel. I'll give you examples like, say, civil status. It could be single, married, and in other countries you have something like divorced maybe. But you can see, as you can see, there are only a few values available. You don't have 10 values there, you don't have 15 values, only a few. Or maybe gender, then you have male and female, and that's it. There is no in between. So there are only a few values. This is one criterion for using a drop-down list in Excel. The other is that there are only a few valid values. Okay, so you're trying to validate the value being entered is correct, is valid, and the other is there are only a few valid values. What I mean in number two is that if you have maybe 15 values or more, then it doesn't make sense to use a drop-down list. One glaring example is names, a name of a person, address. These things you cannot put in a list because it will be a very, very unimaginable, too long of a list. It will make even the Excel hang. Okay, so that's the start. You start with the criteria, trying to determine if you really have a real need for a drop-down list. Now let's look at a scenario where a scenario that could make us think of using a drop-down list. Okay, if you focus on the column item type, column D, we have a couple of values there. At first glance they look okay, but let's just go one by one. You see, the first is vegetable, singular. The second is vegetables, which is plural. The third is meat, M-E-A-T, correctly spelled. The fourth one is meat, and it doesn't make sense in this category of value. So it is obviously a misspelling, a typo error by somebody who was trying to type meat, M-E-A-T. And then you have vegetable, which is written by somebody in his own version of an abbreviation of the word vegetable. And then we have meat, which is in uppercase M. So this is just a very short list, but you can see the possibility of in the future encountering data inconsistency problems. And if you put some logic into this, try to apply some rules, create a macro in Excel, in any kind of programming language, then you will have, it will not be a headache, but you will come up with inaccurate reports, inaccurate processing of data. And as a consequence, you will come up with inaccurate business decisions, right? Okay, so that is the scenario. Now let's look. So I copied the whole data set from this sheet called before to the one called after. And you just take note that our intent is to create drop-down lists on all these cells under the column of item type. Okay, and that's what we're gonna learn in this video. The first step to do that is to create a sheet, which I've already done. I created a sheet called item_type. And in it, I have listed. You list down the valid and unique values you have in mind, the values that you intend to put in the drop-down list. You put them in a list here, in a new sheet. That's what I did. Another rule of thumb is that it would be nice to list them alphabetically so that it makes sense when you're trying to look for the value. It's alphabetical. Next is to be consistent. If you can see, the first value is, some people call it proper case, some people call it title case. So it's, the first letter is capitalized. So let's be consistent. If that is the case, then you should apply the same kind of convention to the rest of the values, which I did, okay? If it's uppercase that you prefer, then do it to all. Okay, that's the first thing. The next is, you can turn this into a table, an Excel table. How do I do that? So you just highlight these values, all these values, either using your mouse or your keyboard keys, arrow keys, shift and then down, down, down. And then once you've selected all the values, you just press on Control T, T as in tango. And then you will be prompted by this dialog. And then you simply need to press OK, and you have a table already. It's an Excel table. Okay, so this will be the starting point, okay, in creating the drop-down list. You created a new sheet, listed down the valid and unique values, and then converted that list into an Excel table. The next is you go to the sheet where you plan to create the drop-down, which is this one. So the next is you highlight those fields, could be one cell or could be multiple cells, wherein you wanted to put that same drop down. So in my case, it's these cells under item type. I will highlight them with my mouse or can be with my keyboard. Okay, I have selected only the fields where I intend to put a drop down list. Next is I will go to data tab here. Okay, and then I will just expand my Excel a bit. And then you go to data validation here. And then it will prompt you with this dialog. And in the settings tab, you go to the drop down called allow, click on the drop down arrow, and then you click on list. And then to the right, you have two checkboxes, ignore blank and in-cell drop down. Ignore blank is saying you are fine even if the user enters nothing blank in these cells that we are concerned with. In my case, I'm okay, so I'll just keep it checked or ticked. The second checkbox, you keep it like that in cell dropdown. And then you go to the field called source, click on that, and then it is actually asking you for the location and the cell range of the range of cells that will become the source of data for the drop-down arrow, drop-down list, okay? So, which in my case is in this sheet called item type. So I will click on that here, and then I will highlight with my mouse or my keyboard keys the fields that will constitute the values that I want to put in the drop-down. So I'll just highlight them like this, okay? And then I click, okay. One other thing, there are two other tabs here. There's an input message, and then in here, if you wanted to customize the prompting message whenever the user is entering some values in the item type field, then you can put them here. In my case, I don't need to. And then there's an error alert tab where you can also customize the error message whenever the user enters something that is contradictory to the validation you expect, okay? And otherwise, you can just come back to settings and everything is okay. I will just click on okay. When you do that, we are back to the sheet called after. And sorry. I'll do it again. Huh? It created the list in the wrong sheet. Okay, I'll just click here, data validation, list, source. I'll go here. I'll click this, and then I'll click OK. Okay, so as you can see, when you look at this sheet called after, nothing seems to have changed from the moment we have seen it before. But in fact, something did happen behind the scenes because we have defined a drop-down list to be created for all of these cells under item type. So now when you click on it, now you see a drop-down arrow. And then when you go to the next, you also see a similar drop-down arrow, right? So now let's try to see how the drop-down helps us or how it works. Let's just pretend we are a user. I'm a user and I'm trying to make a data entry here. And I, for some reason, typed ant. For some reason, I don't know why. And then I press enter. So what happens is that I am prompted by an error message by Excel. the default one, which is saying this value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell. So after I close this alert, it actually clears the field with the erroneous value, as you can see. Okay, you see, I'll try another one. Let's say I try this fish, and then when I try, obviously it's a wrong value because we have only defined 3 valid values in the dropdown: vegetable, meat, and fruit, and this is not one of them, so it becomes an invalid value as far as the dropdown is concerned. Now, when I try to navigate away from this view, from this position, either using a keyboard key or the mouse, then it will not work. You see, if I click with my mouse, it will prompt me with an error message saying so and so, which is the same thing we've seen a while back. Okay, so meaning this value that was entered is invalid because it is not in any of the 3 valid values that were defined in the drop-down list. Okay, so when I click on and I close the alert, then it clears the field. Now, so the next thing for the user to do is simply to click on the drop-down list and then choose from any of these 3 valid values. Could be a fruit, meat, vegetable. But of course, we need to make sense. So since this is radish, then we will choose vegetable. Okay. And once we do that, it will be fine. I will be able to navigate away from this, even, using either the mouse or the keyboard keys. Any keyboard key I can, because it's correct, it's valid. So the same thing here, it will be, let's try to say, enter something again, something which is not in the list. Okay, man, maybe. And then again, it will throw the same kind of error for the same reason. And the user will enter the right one. And let's just say beef. Of course, beef we know is meat, but you will notice that even though there is already a validation based on these 3 valid values, the drop-down is not yet that smart as a human being as to filter the data that makes sense. Meaning, beef we know is meat, we know that. But even if the user chooses fruit, it will be allowed. Why? Because the only kind of validation present in this drop-down right now is that the value you choose is in any one of these 3. That's it. So it will allow that. If you wanted to introduce another layer of validation, then it is really up to you to add it to this Excel. Could be via macro or whatever it is. Okay, just be aware that this is, here in this video, we're trying to learn how to create a drop-down list, and we've already created one. All right, so we started by looking at the criteria because we cannot really, it doesn't make sense to create a drop-down for something that has maybe more than 10 values. It doesn't really make sense. It will be a very long list. If you have 15, you have 20 fields like name, address, they won't make sense. Okay, so I hope you've learned something from this video. And if you haven't subscribed, please click subscribe and the notification bell. And I'll see you in the next video.